Hello and welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host, Jackson Keller.
And we're back with a second video game episode in the month of October. We've gone out of our way. We missed September, so we're making it up to you. Although we'll see how much longer that goes. We're talking about things. Spoiler alerts. But no, we're talking about Dead Space at the end of the month. Am I saying words? Are words coming out of my mouth right now?
Oh no, Sean's turning into a necromorph. That's it. It's a bit.
There we go. And we segued away from the fact that I was just vomiting words. We did it. It worked.
I'm here for you, buddy. Don't worry.
I appreciate that. Yeah, no, we're talking about Dead Space this week because it's the last of the spooky months. This is going to come out for anyone who's not listening to it live. It's going to be coming out on Halloween, so that's perfect. You know what? I'm going to take a stance here and say it was a spooky game at one point. It's still a very good game. Spooky's a term.
I actually was thinking about this because, like, for some of these old games, because I mentioned before, like, obviously with our last game with Silent Hill 2, that I used to watch a lot of Zero Punctuation, and because I was a teenager when I started watching it, often had, like, nothing else to do, I have seen a lot of those, like, 360 PS3 era videos a lot. And, like, while I was playing the game and, like, the necromorphs, like, first started going, like, blah, 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 I just, like, remembered vividly, like, that bit from either his Dead Space 1 or 2 review, where it's, like, the first thing, subtlety is not a word that Dead Space has in its lexicon. The first 5 minutes, a necromorph pulls its face off, so it goes, look at me, I'm scary, are you scared yet? And, that's kind of how I felt about the horror element, but the action element, fucking superb, fucking great action game.
Yeah, no, the horror has, I don't know if it's waned with years or if I've just gotten older and wiser and less stupid, because as a teenager, we're all stupid, and I remember being like, ooh, this is a spooky game as a kid, and now I'm just like, this isn't that spooky, but I'm enjoying the fuck out of it. I enjoyed this down to the moments when I'm literally just like a space janitor going to fix things.
I really like that aspect of it a lot. I really love when the games have that blue collar flair. Pikmin does that really well too. Actually, weird comparison, but
I mean they're both about overwhelming odds and a time limit and horrifying monstrosities. Honestly,
I guess it's not that weird of a comparison. That's true.
I think it's really the difference in color. You make it bright and poppy, and suddenly you have Dead Space as Pikmin. You make it bleak, and suddenly you have Pikmin as Dead Space.
Oh no!
And they're both about markers, right? I'm kicking the ball to you on this one because I don't know much about Pikmin.
Pikmin has onions.
Mm-hmm. And what is an onion if not a marker? It has layers.
There it is. Where the fuck should we start here with Dead Space? I feel like there's a lot to talk about, both within the game and in the outside context.
Well, before we do anything, like we've given a little bit of a light synopsis, but like what experiences with the game, final thoughts on it? Like, did you? I mean, obviously you enjoyed it, but like, tell us a little bit more about your experience with the game.
Oh, sure. So I was a little wary, approaching this one. I felt like it could really go either way, because I had never really had any experience with this particular series before. I only knew it by reputation, that the first one and the second one, to a lesser extent, are pretty well regarded, and then of course the third one was the appraiser for the doom of video games. It was the first big microtransaction scandal, or one of the first at least, which of course now seems absolutely quaint in comparison to the bullshit that EA and their ilk does now.
It's up there in the legacy of horse armor from Bethesda.
It really is. It really is. Like, if you're looking at the history of corporate greed in video games, like Dead Space 3 is an important bullet point, which is why it's so interesting that Dead Space 1, like, I wasn't really sure what to expect. Like, all I really knew was that it was well regarded. and not much else as far as like why it was well regarded, like or what elements. Like I didn't have the same like context that I did for Silent Hill 2, which of course ended up working against my opinion of that game. But regardless, like very quickly, I had some uneasiness at first just because like it is very much a product of its time. Came out in 2008. That was very much an era, like growing pain, transitionary period for games. And you can see elements of that here, particularly with the storytelling, I'd say. But as far as like an action game goes, it's incredibly well thought out. The like aesthetics and UI and a lot of those choices. Like, yeah, there's a lot of like dingy, like brown Gears of War brownness that you kind of expect from that era. But
oh, it's so brown.
but like that doesn't, unlike other games like that doesn't stop it from being like having clear level design, like using a lot of light and color to like indicate important things. Like you never feel terribly lost or that you're missing something important, which I think is something that can't be said for a lot of its contemporaries. And more importantly, just a lot of the like you said, I was really tickled by the space janitor touches. I really like the upgrade system, how it really gives this sense that you're going in and like bolting this extra shit onto your weapons and armor, and like how you need power nodes, like not just for like upgrades. It's not just like you straight up use a power node to get an upgrade. You have to connect them through like this motherboard. And so that's really cool. Like, you know, people memed about the fact that the UI is on his back, and why would he need to see his why would they put the UI on his back?
Dum-dums, all of them. No,
because it's great. It's actually great. Really creative, like minimalistic. Keeps a lot of clutter out of the screen, and I think the biggest takeaway is that I was surprised at how punchy the game was and how like good the weapons felt, because a lot of those early 360 PS3 games, like the action games, feel like fucking trash to go back to. Like you're just, you know, plugging like ping pong balls into an enemy until it like collapses into a physics object. But here, like there's some real like gnarliness to it.
All right. So did you ever have the moment early on, this isn't really a spoiler, but there's a character.
I know exactly who you're talking about before you even say it.
There's a character that's dying, and like you walk up on, I don't even remember if it was him, her, whoever, and they're like, "Oh God, save me!" And then they die and they turn into a physics object, and then they just like bounce for a second.
You can kick them around after it completely undercut the drama. So like that's the kind of thing where the game's showing its age a little bit, because like for some reason like every single fucking game thought they had to be Half-Life and make everything a physics object back then.
More like flat out.
Or like it's true. It's so true. But yeah, I mean like there's definitely some quirks, but it's not there's no deal breakers, and I'd say that it's very much worth going back to, particularly if, like me, you're a big fan of Resident Evil 4 and have not played this, because this is very much not like it iterates on it, innovates on it, and has its own style and flair and personality, but it definitely feels very much in that action horror shooter mold. And like so if you're into that sort of thing, which I am, this game's fucking great.
Yeah, just a little bit of context for, you know, how my experience with this series and whatnot. I have not played any of 3, though I did watch a video from a gentleman named Noah Caldwell Gervais, who made an 1.5 to 2 hour takedown of the series and just kind of discussing themes and ideas in it. And that was really fascinating, especially if you're like me and have familiarity with Dead Space 1 and 2, but nothing with 3, because I don't want to talk about what happens in 3, but like the DLC for 3 is buck fucking wild, and deserves more recognition than it got, because I didn't even realize that 3 had like gameplay DLC for it, but it sounds wild.
It's especially interesting based on what Sean has told me, considering the corporate controversy. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, if you're interested in it, I highly recommend looking it up. If not, and you want to play Dead Space 3, I I don't know why.
I've heard
but
it's actually fine. I've heard it's not that bad, but like it was just not what people wanted, and the microtransactions kind of ruined it.
Interesting. That might be something that you and I need to do together at some point.
Maybe a co-op stream or something.
Yeah, I'd be down to do that. So Dead Space 1, I borrowed from my friend. I think I still have the disc in my house and have not spoken to this person in 10 years. Sorry, David. But I got to the point where there's an air vent monster. That's all I'm going to say about that. I don't remember anything past it, and so I think I actually beat it for the first time this playthrough. Dead Space 2, I remember a little bit more of, but I also don't think I beat that one. I don't know whether I was just a dumb kid and spooked, or whether I just found it too hard, which I don't know how I would have done that either. This is not a hard game. I should have put it on a higher difficulty. I played this on medium, and at one point went, I feel like this game would be better if it was harder. Because right now, it's just really not.
I actually had that exact same thought, like, going through. Like, about, I want to say, like, 2 or 3 hours in, as, like, my everything was starting to rack up, and I've been piling up ammo and health kits and stuff. I'm like, I feel like this would really, really slap on hard. But, we got a deadline to meet. It's too late. So...
Yeah, I mean, I actually ended up finishing the game in like 6 hours total, I think. Like, I blasted through this. And that wasn't for lack of like exploration and whatnot. I found a shit ton of power nodes. I found a bunch of logs. I read them all. I listened to them all. Like, I blasted through this game. And I feel like having it on easy really, or medium, not easy, did a lot to do that with that. Like, oh my God, on easy, this game would be boring as sin.
Yes,
Holy hell.
It would. Oh my God.
But yeah, no, to speak to like the punchy guns, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it is like dismemberment based. So like when you shoot them, like you can feel the hit because like things happen. It's not just like watching them soak bullets into the chest for a while. It's, you shoot them in the leg flies off. You get that instant haptic feedback of, oh, look at that my actions had actual consequences.
Contrast with like the assault rifle from Gears of War. The shotguns in Gears of War feel okay because there is that decent feedback because they are kind of insta-kills, so people get like jibbed. But it's definitely like a Gears of War and other games like it.
Hang on. Is it gibbed or jibbed? Is this a GIF thing going on here?
I think it is. I've actually heard it said both ways. I don't know which one is correct.
Yell at us. You will.
You will. So regardless, like when I say like, they soak bullets until they fall down and become a physics object. Like if you're using the rifles in Gears of War, that's literally what happens. Like there is no like reaction. You see a little bit of blood squirt off of them. The sound is very piddly. Then they just go doot and collapse into a flat out heap. But yeah, and the sound design too on these plasma weapons is like, ooh, these ain't your Halo Fisher Price like Star Wars blasters. This is like real gnarly fucking like thunk. As you like, it really does feel like you've appropriated a fucking like mining tool to butcher some horrible monstrosities, which is great.
They cared about their audio stuff here. That guy that I was talking about a little bit ago found like an article where they were interviewing one of the sound designers, and to like get the airlock vents opening and closing, like that kind of like mechanical grind. They recorded like a tram in San Francisco or something like that had like a similar opening and closing mechanism because it's the most horrifying sound I can think of. It's just like metal on metal grinding and disgusting and gross. And like, yeah, that's the sound we want to use for this. Like it just puts your teeth on edge listening to it. I'm like, that's fucking sick. So yeah, like they care about sound. Like sound is a big thing in this game.
Yeah, and like the squishiness of the bodies, like even in moments where I died, like when I got shredded by a bunch of asteroids at one point, which is also cool. Like that part fucking sucked. We could talk more about it, but like in general, the spacewalk stuff, I really like that. I really like how it puts the timer on your air, and like you gotta kind of go from airlock to airlock, and sometimes you gotta fight things and jump in zero gravity. Like they make really good use of space. I almost wish that the outside stuff was like dead silent. You know what I mean? Like they like they turn down the volume and put like a filter.
Yeah, it's definitely muted. It's like a pff,
Yeah.
as opposed to like a good bang.
But since space is a vacuum, like I feel like it would have been a really cool decision.
The enemies are all silent.
The enemies are all silent, which is great. Yeah. So even then, even like that's a small like nitpick, but overall, like yeah, I really like those spacewalk moments and the zero gravity stuff. Did a lot to make it feel not just like okay, we're playing Resident Evil 4 in space, which is what we're doing to an extent, but like the dismemberment mechanics, like that's a really creative, really fun conceit for an action game. And then some of the like was reminded of like Super Mario Galaxy during the parts where you're like running around on the walls and stuff, and like space jumping and shooting necromorphs in midair. It was cool. I liked it.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I really wish like the stuff outside is all pretty linear, and like you go out and you're back in. I really wish there was a little bit more like whole exploration, honestly, because like there's even inside, like it's not necessarily super. Like the inside is very linear. Like you even have a button that like goes bing and it points you exactly where you need to go, which is a very good like mechanical choice. It's easy to get lost, and like it's a really nice quick way to do that. But like even as you do that, there's little other doors you can go into and whatnot. And like I wish there was like just a little bit more corridors outside, just to kind of give us a little bit of a better idea of what the ship's shape felt like, you know?
Yeah, although I did really like how sort of the central mechanic for moving through the chapters was like going back to the tram and like seeing the outline of the ship. Like I thought that was a nice little touch, and it showed you like on the map like where your next destination was, if you're going to the bridge or the engine room or the med bay or what have you. And so that was neat. But there definitely is, and this is, I think, kind of the game's 2008 sort of showing, in that it's got
more like 2000 late.
Oh, bitch! Oh,
get him! That's it. Podcast over.
But so like it's got a very BioShock structure, and that's not really a compliment. I've got feelings about the BioShock series that are slightly controversial. But at least in BioShock 1, right? Like there was, without going too much into a famous spoiler, there was a reason the game was structured the way it was. Which was, of course, an extremely memorable part of that game. Whereas here, it definitely it definitely felt less like I was exploring an abandoned ship at times, and more like what was actually happening, which was I was kind of running a rat race for the NPC voices that were shouting at me.
I like doing that a lot, honestly. As I said, it goes back into that whole like space janitor and whatnot, and like it fit. Like I kind of like I want more of that, honestly. Like I would play a game that is pretty much all that.
Well, see, and you know what? Like I agree to an extent, but like what I'm thinking about is here's a classic BioShock moment where Fort Frolic, a extremely memorable part of the original BioShock, with like Sandra Cohen and all his weird art and stuff, that nonetheless has absolutely nothing to do with the main plot. But they had all this cool stuff. So they're like, well, how can we route the player into doing Sandra Cohen's bullshit? Literally, like on your way to the plot, rocks fall in front of you and you have to take a detour. Like it's really inelegant and really obvious. And I felt like there were a couple of moments in this that gave me like a similar feeling, like, oh, come on.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like when it felt more integrated, I was really into it. But yeah, there were definitely a couple moments where I'm like, yep, okay, sure, game. Like early on, the medbay stuff doesn't feel as egregious. Because like there's an early on in the medbay where like, oh, you can't go that way. You have to go the other way first. I'm like, okay, you know what? This is early on. You know, trying to get us to explore the ship a little bit more. I get what you're going for. But yeah, later on, there are some moments where you're just like, oh my god, just let me walk through. Don't just lock the fucking door. What are you doing? I've been through this door before.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of the medbay stuff, because that is either shortly after Yeah, that's shortly after you get like the pickup ability. I was kind of hoping that, not that I guess I necessarily needed like a Half-Life 2 scale like gravity gun integration, because that was kind of the central mechanic of that game that made it really stand out. But I was kind of hoping I'd be able to do more with that. Like it's, as it stands, it's just like, cause you can pick things up, but like, it's got some sci-fi wibbly wobbly nonsense to make him like use magnetism to like pick it up almost like he's a Jedi. And I'm like, damn, like that could be really cool if like in scenarios where you're running low on ammo, like you maybe have to throw things at the enemy. But it's kind of awkward to handle, and isn't really practical for anything except for moving stuff. Which it doesn't need to be, but I guess it's a cool enough idea that I'm like, ooh, this would have been nice to have some integration. But again, this is real nitpicky territory.
Counterpoint, though, neither one of us ran low on ammo.
Well, exactly. Like, and after a certain point, I realized I'm like, oh, there would never be any situation where I would need to do this. I'm
90% sure you can. I didn't think to try it. But there is a fight way late game that has some things around the arena conspicuously like, you might want to throw these. And I never had to because I had ammo out the fucking asshole. But the option is definitely there.
Maybe it's more of a thing on hard, which would be interesting. Because, yeah, I definitely noticed throughout the game there would be, like, barrels and oxygen tanks and stuff that like, oh, hey, if you feel like it, maybe you can shoot one of these. And I'm like, or I could just shoot them in the leg like I've been doing, game. No thanks.
So fun fact though, just in the context of like talking about difficulties and whatnot, I think what I really want to do now is I want to go back and play this again, because you unlock impossible difficulty, which I don't remember if it's the difficulty that sets this up or whether it is another setting within it. But I do know that there is a way to play through the game where the only times you get to save, you can save at each save station once, and that's it, and the checkpoints are removed.
Oh, that's super cool.
Yes, that sounds like the way to fucking play this game.
No, it totally is. Because I was wondering, I remember, like, when I saw the save stations, like, that reminds me, that's like the ink ribbons from Resident Evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, because when I saw the save stations, I'm like, oh, cool. Like, I actually really like in these kind of action horror games, like, I love the typewriters in Resi 4. Like, how, you know, you get that music, and, you know, it kind of ticks out the where you are, and, like, you know very clearly where your last typewriter was. There's a real sense of tension. So I felt similarly with the save stations here. I'm like, oh, cool. Like, we're doing the Resi 4 thing. But then when I died, there was just a checkpoint, which was nice. Don't get me wrong. Like, I hadn't saved in a hot minute, so I was glad I didn't have to repeat. But I was definitely thinking, like, that would be aesthetic as fuck. To only have the save points.
I did the same thing. I died at one point, realized that it didn't matter if I saved or not, and then proceeded to never save the rest of the game except when I changed levels.
Yes.
And I'm just like, all right, yeah, that's fine. I don't need to save anywhere else. Why would I?
I guess while we're on the topic, since I keep bringing it up, I mean, this game invites a lot of BioShock comparisons, I think. But on a similar note, if you ever want to replay the original BioShock, because I actually do think that game has some fun mechanics and level design, turn off the Vita chambers.
Yeah.
You could do that, and it is great.
I feel like in freshman year of college on Halloween, I actually set up BioShock to play it again, because I remember it being kind of a spooky game. And that was the last time I played BioShock, actually. I remember sitting in a room. I think you went to a party, actually, or something.
I
think
weren't there.
I
did, yeah.
And, like, I set it up because I'm like, ooh, I'm going to play BioShock by myself because I'm sad.
Wasted away again in Margaritaville.
Yeah. So that's what happened there. But yeah, no, I think I turned off Vita Chambers for that. I think. I'm gonna go ahead and say yes, I did, and not no.
It's the way to be. Moral of the story: game designers should not be afraid to hurt us when it comes to checkpoints, as long as we consent to it.
I mean, I think it's one of those things more than anything, especially in horror games.
Yes,
because the main crux of horror games, and like this is actually something I want to talk about with this game, because like I was never really scared. I think the fact that I had checkpoints really did away with a lot of the scares, because there was one part, I don't remember what part it was. No, I know exactly what part it was. Do I want to call this spoilers or not? I'm gonna say not spoilers yet. I'll tell you about what it is when we hit spoilers.
Okay.
But there was one part where I just kept dying, and I was more frustrated than anything, because I ended up in a situation in which I was low ammo, and like it wasn't taking me back to the last time I saved, where I could, reassess my situation, spend the money, weigh my risks versus reward of spending money to buy ammo versus, not. And instead I basically just had to brute force my way through it, and it fucking sucked. So like I do think that like taking us back to our save point or being less judicious with checkpoints would be way more in this game's favor for horror elements, because suddenly things feel threatening as opposed to just like walking meat sacks that you shoot through.
Yeah, so let's talk about this game's approach to horror, I think. Because it's interesting in that I know a lot of people who at least have memories of this being really scary. Like, it made a big impression on a lot of my friends. But at the same time, I also remember...
I was also a dumb kid. I was terrified of scary things as a kid. I am not.
And I mean, we would have been teenagers when this game came out, which I think is like the perfect time to enjoy this game's particular brand of horror, because it feels very... I'm gonna coin a phrase here. Maybe it's completely inappropriate, but considering that the series eventually went all Call of Duty, maybe it is. This game feels kind of bro horror to me. And
broer? Broer. There's something there. Broer is too mouthy.
Broer.
See, that's too much. That's too mouthy. Too many R's.
So, regardless, I call it bro horror because this feels like the perfect game where if you're in a room full of like loud, rowdy boys, and there's necromorphs like screaming and twisting around, like it's not subtle. This is maybe like, if we're talking about the scale of horror, like for me, Silent Hill 2 was maybe too pulled back and too subtle for me to scary. But this goes too much in the opposite direction, where there's constantly being overwhelmed by like meat sacks, and like, so it's very frantic in terms of action combat. But in terms of horror, not.
Well, see, there's something to be said though for being overwhelmed. That's why zombie movies work. And I think the problem here is not so much that it is. Like, it's definitely bro horror because it's more, shooty McShooty face. But it's not quite like the consequences aren't there. And I think that the flaw in this game is the lack of consequences for dying. Like, I think that's what really makes it more bro horror than like conventional horror, because it is more action heavy and it's more forgiving of mistakes. Like, I feel like if you're coming hot off the heels of Call of Duty, you're like, yeah, bro, we're going to play a scary game tonight, bro. Let's go. Like, someone who is playing Dead Space coming off the heels of Call of Duty wants to not deal with that. Like, he wants to play through the game and be like, whoa, dude,
look
fucking
at that
body horror.
Yeah.
And, like, not deal with the tension of losing progress and, like, weighing your options and whatnot. And, like, I think that this game has the mechanics for those to be built in, but it has to be on higher difficulty.
Yeah, and I guess like I'm gonna make a Resi 4 comparison here, because I feel like,
wow, your first one.
I know, right? Just really what an original take by me. But so to contrast with Resi 4 though, like in that opening village segment, I think did a lot better as far as making me feel overwhelmed, kind of like holding up in a house, like the classic sort of zombie movie thing. And I think that what really sells it in that opening bit is the chainsaw guy and the consequences, and that the chainsaw is an insta-kill, and it will continue to be. So every time you hear that fucking chainsaw, and you know that guy is going to eat like all of your shotgun ammo just to take down, it really gives you a palpable feeling of like, oh shit. Whereas here, like, the necromorphs might be too fast and too busy for me to really like process like any feeling of being scared, because I'm thrust into like the heat of combat with all these limbs like wrangling around and like this screaming, and there's just a lot going on. Whereas like there's a lot of guys at the beginning of Resi 4, but the way that they move is still a little slower and more deliberate. So like I have more of a sense for like exactly like how much I'm being overwhelmed and what I'm up against, whereas like I'm in full like action blast them away mode in Dead Space, which is fun and good because the combat is great, but it all feels like maybe a little too much for me, like even in the aesthetics. Like the first time you see a necromorph, it's got like a spotlight. It really is like one of the reasons I think that Yahtzee quote stuck with me so much is just how accurate it was. Like ooga booga booga booga, like I'm gonna stand here for a full minute and like, you know, the full spotlight and let you see all my twisting limbs and stuff, which is like they're neat designs and they're good for like the whole purpose of like blowing limbs away. So like mechanically they're well suited. But like as far as
Cronenberg doesn't like just sit there with the spotlight on his body horror and like then continue that body horror throughout. It's shrouded, you know?
Right. And I also think the fact that like if we're talking 2008, the fact that like even though it's a lot more visceral, like at the end of a fight I'm still kicking around a bunch of limbs and physics objects is still a little silly.
Though those I found, at least towards the later games, started to fade away, which made it a little bit less silly. But there was definitely, I distinctly remember one time where a physics object got jammed between two things, and I could walk around to the other side because they're just sitting there going, making a shit ton of noise. I'm like, ooh, that's kind of spooky. I wonder what the fuck that is. And then I like walked around for a little bit. I was doing some quests, and then I came back. It was still going. I'm like, what the fuck is it? Then I look over, and there's an arm like jammed between two crates, and I just shot it. And I'm like, well, solve that problem, and then moved on with my life.
This actually reminds me of another mechanic that when it was introduced, I thought like, oh, that's super cool. But then I realized that like because of ammo and stuff, I never really ended up utilizing. So the stasis, the time slow thing that you can use on certain you have to use to progress through certain like fast machinery, and you can also use it on the necromorphs to kind of slow them down. Towards the beginning of the game, I was using the power a bit when I'm like, oh man, like I'm gonna be low on ammo. Like sometimes it's gonna be better to avoid them. Like, yeah, exactly. Like it really, because the game is so combat heavy, like it feels like if I'm already pointing at them, I may as well just shoot, you know, because there's so fucking many. Whereas if there's like a big boy, again, like if we're making the Resi 4 comparison, like if I had that power against the chainsaw guy, like you bet your sweet ass I'd be using that on him every time I saw him.
I will say, later game, I did find myself using it a bit more, specifically on like the last level where enemies start to swarm you from more areas. And so like there's a part in particular where you end up on a thin pathway with like enemies coming from both sides. And so it becomes really helpful there to kind of like, all right, I need to freeze this side so I can focus this side, but like I got to keep my eye on both sides. But like you're right, it's not until like late game that you really start to see the use of slowing.
So yeah, so this game's got a lot of cool mechanics that I feel like, at least on normal, like maybe this is a case where just like impossible or even hard is the way to be, which I believe. But you know, I cannot confirm because my only experience was the normal.
I would say neither one of us thought, I should play this on the hardest difficulty on our first playthrough.
Yes.
Like that is almost universally a bad idea.
Yes.
All right. Do we want to kind of talk spoilers, like a little bit more in depth with the game?
Yeah, sure. We can talk about specific moments a bit more, and I mean, we can talk a little bit about the story. I guess I don't know if there's anything terribly interesting to say about the content of the story itself, but
we'll dive into that in 1 second. Before we do, as a heads up, next week, we're either going to be talking about Jojo Rabbit or The Lighthouse. I'm going to be seeing both this weekend because of fucking course I'm going to be seeing both this weekend. And we'll talk at some point and to kind of figure out what we want to do. We never really set up what we're doing next week. So it's one of those two is basically what it boils down to. Keep your eyes peeled on our Twitter account. Hey, look at that. I'm making more use of it again.
Hell yes, Twitter daddy.
So yeah, that's next week. For now, though, do you want to just start with the story? Because we can knock that out like Done.
Yeah. So the story, it's not like terrible or anything. It does the job. But I mean, it does the job. Like
It fits with the aesthetic very well, and that it's super utilitarian.
Yeah, and it's basically like it's the kind of thing where like as soon as you think you've figured out what's going on, which is going to be very quickly, chances are you have. The only surprise was that I thought one character was going to betray me because it seemed like they were very obviously setting up for that, and then it turned out to be the other one. And then, like, so not much of a surprise. It's still the result is still the same. That, like, you know, you have the cultists, you have, you know, this Lovecraftian artifact turning people into necromorphs, which, like, in the presentation of which I liked that moment of like, ah, shit, like there's something in the air, like we gotta that moment in the game where you gotta fix like the air filter, or the doctor lady has to like come up with the poison or whatever to try and put it at bay, and like the characters being like, yo, I'm starting to see things, shit's fucked. So like the presentation is very solid, but like as far as the actual story itself, there's a big bad boy cult who wants to turn people into necromorphs, and, you know, they sent alien-style some miners to go get it and, you know, sacrifice them for purposes, and, I mean, that's about it.
Yep. Unitology is the cult, and it is in no way, shape, or form relevant to Scientology. I don't know why you would even think that.
Not at all. Especially when you look at the necromorphs' development name, the Xenu.
But yeah, no, the story is super bare bones. It tells you what to do, where to go. There's little bits and pieces of it that are memorable. Like, I do like them, kind of like being like, all right, I'm worried that I'm seeing shit now. What the fuck is going on? What's happening here? That's a little nice touch. But like broad strokes, it's not super engaging. I'm curious. I knew. So like part of the whole thing is that, like, you know, you've got your girlfriend, wife, whoever, Nicole, and she's on the ship supposedly, although it's fairly quickly apparent that she's dead. But I'm kind of curious if if I hadn't known that going in, would that be a little bit of a bigger twist? I'm hesitant to say yes, because she still plays a very minor role, and I just didn't care.
Yeah, so the problem is that Isaac, I think it almost would have worked better if Isaac literally was just space janitor, with like that this was just his job and we didn't have the dead wife thing. Partially because like I was also thinking about another game from 2008, Gears of War 2, which had a missing dead wife subplot that was embarrassing. Like obviously like that's not this game's fault that like it came out the same year as another game with the same plot, but it only reinforced like how unnecessary it was, especially because it was super weird that Isaac is just like a player avatar, and so it's like why do I care about like his girlfriend? I really don't. I'm just here to like, you know, bolt some stuff back together.
They do give him speaking voice in the second game, actually.
I couldn't remember if it was the second or third. I knew eventually they did.
Yeah, in the second game they actually let him talk.
Yeah.
I will say it is kind of mortifying, because the end does show her, your girlfriend Nicole, actually committing suicide. Like, the big twist is like the tape that you've been watching this whole time of her being like, Isaac, I miss you, I love you, I'm sorry. Like, you've been cutting it off too quickly. Because like the full tape ends with her being like, I'm so sorry, but this is horrifying. And she's like rolling up her sleeves to inject herself with something, and it's like uncomfortable to watch. It's the animation hasn't aged super well. If you were around at the beginning of the stream with the intro going on, you saw actually what the video I'm talking about. And it continues about with that level of animation, which is not stellar, but like it's effective regardless.
Yeah, so that is an interesting, and that's what I mean when I say that the game is very well presented, even if the actual like story ideas aren't all that interesting, and that's a moment where like they're taking it maybe just a little bit beyond. They're giving it some personal stakes, but overall throughout the story, like I kept forgetting that he had like a wife that was on board.
She disappears for chapters.
Like the captain kept like everyone's always like, "Hey, don't worry about your wife, man. We'll find her." And I'm like, "Oh, I wasn't worried about my wife actually."
Thanks, citizen of Soliana. Hey. Your dead wife. Hey.
Oh.
No, yeah, I get that too, because like there were times too where I'd be like, wait, what the fuck? Oh, yeah. And like, so here's the thing too. I don't know if you caught this. I would be surprised if you did, but I was doing a little bit of reading. But apparently the chapter levels, there's 12 chapters, and if you take the first letter from all of them, it spells out Nicole is dead, which is the most 2008 fucking twist I've ever seen.
Oh my god, I didn't know that. That's amazing. Oh, that's bless you. Like they're you can tell they're trying.
They really are, and like I think that's why like the story still works with what it has, is because like it's something that they're like actively trying. And this is an era where like story games were weird, you know, like no one was really sure what they were doing with it. Late PS2, early PS3, like story driven games were starting to become a thing outside of like JRPGs. And like I guess, you know, there's Metal Gear, of course, but
Metal Gear was always notable for being like one of the only games like that before.
Yeah, so like this is all very much experimentational in this era. So like I give them credit. Like they were clearly trying to do something, and they did all right, and like that's what you can hope for in this era, honestly. It's better than most of the forgettable plots.
It's not embarrassing, which is more than I could say about a lot of its contemporaries. And really, I think if I had to say what my main criticism of the presentation is, that this was definitely the era. We were talking a little bit about this in the pre-discussion about like my initial thought was like audio logs or something that is not as popular nowadays. Although like we were talking about enough examples that maybe I'm just wrong about that, or like
I just don't think you're playing the games that have them.
Yeah. Like, because then I remembered those awful fucking cassette tapes from MGS5, and like other things. So, like, but audio logs, I mean, the thing about them is that I've never especially enjoyed them as a narrative device. I think they can be a little awkward, but I think when they're at their best, like, again, despite any criticisms I have in BioShock, I think they work all right in those games because, like, the characters are really clear. It's often revealing information that changes the way you look at like the literal events happening in front of you. Like you are missing something if you don't listen to them. I was just gonna say that like I feel like with these, again, they're well presented in this game, but like once you figure out the cults behind it, it doesn't go much beyond that. And so it made them feel less necessary. And although I picked them up and listened to them when I found them, it wasn't like a chore or anything, but it didn't feel especially necessary to me.
I think my opinion has kind of shifted on these a little bit. Mostly, as I said in pre-discussion, I was talking about two games that had really good side plot stuff, or like audio logs, which was Control, Remedy's game, and there's no surprise there. Remedy is really good with backstory and world building. And the one that was surprising was Borderlands 3. And I think like what I have found that I like about audio logs is that they tend to be little snippets of usually pretty good writing, or like pretty evocative writing in one way or another. Because it's basically saying like, hey, we need to condense this whole story down to like a brief second here. And so, like, while it might not necessarily expand upon the situation at hand, it might just be really effective in the moment writing. Like, for example, in Dead Space, the one that stands out to me is at one point you find an audio log of a dude who is aware of what's happening, is like feeling the changes himself, and just says, the one thing I can do, I have to stop this. And you listen to him one by one shoot off his own limbs. And it's mortifying to listen to. It's super uncomfortable, super terrifying, and really effective. And I think that's when audio logs are at their best, when they're just adding, they're like little snippets of evocative writing, of backstory or world building, or just in the moment situations, and like it might not necessarily be the greatest storytelling if you're trying to intertwine it with like the main story to give a little bit of extra details about what's happening like immediately, because it's easy to miss and not necessarily informative. But like if you're just adding backstory or moments, they're really fucking good. And like I think that there's an art to them, and I think I have a newfound respect for them.
There definitely is an art to them. Like, there's for sure a gradient of, like, I've seen audio logs that were just, like, cringy and embarrassing and not at all worth, like, picking up. And to really well executed ones. I think my problem, even at their best, is that, like, this was one of the things I struggle with BioShock 1 in particular. Infinite has a little bit more of an active plot. But like a lot of times, sometimes the audio logs can be too good, and that they are more interesting than what is happening in front of me. I call it the Harry Potter 7 problem, because the 7th Harry Potter book, half of it is like really interesting backstory about Dumbledore and the birth of Voldemort, the Wizarding War, and whatever, and the other half is Harry camping, and it's really boring. And I feel like audio logs have that effect sometimes, like particularly in BioShock 1, where like
Borderlands 3. Oh wow, I don't know what happened there. Ooh.
Sean's got some opinion.
All I'm saying is, why would you want to hear about the fascinating war of the weapons merchants and how they've ravaged the galaxy and the consequences they've left behind, when you can go fight the streaming twins? What's up, Vault Hunters? Am I right? Borderlands 3 story was garbage.
But did gamers rise up in it?
I talk about your stuff.
So yeah, so like with the story, I mean, I would not, like, if someone's asked me, is this a really great game story that I should play and experience, my answer is no. But as far as it being well presented and not distracting and not embarrassing, that's honestly an amazing bar to clear for a game from 2007, 2008. Actually, I have a bit of an anecdote about the quality of game writing from 2007 and 2008.
Well, lay it on us. I've just gone on my anecdote about Borderlands 3, so
a little while ago, I was going through some of my old work and like some of my old fiction from when I was in like high school, and I read through a screenplay that I had written for a game that I had wanted to make. And I read through the whole thing, and of course it was garbage. But like probably the highest praise I've given myself as a writer is that like at 15, I wrote the script at like 15, and I read through it again, and I'm like, that was at least as good as a Gears of War game. Like, this could pass for a AAA video game script. And so, yeah, I mean, I will say that of the AAA games that I have played, even the ones with the boring stories, they have come a ways.
Oh yeah. Well, you know what? Let's give some final thoughts here and dive into some Q&A going on here, because we're about that time.
Yeah, sounds good.
What are your final thoughts on Dead Space?
Really, really pleasantly surprised. If you hadn't recommended it, I don't think I would have gone out of my way to seek this out. It's well regarded, but not in like it, but kind of a sleeper gem. Like, it was popular and sold really well and became a big series, but you don't hear people talk about it so much nowadays. So
it's also not well regarded in like your area of gaming.
No, it's definitely outside of my usual wheelhouse. Like, I definitely have fallen off sort of the AAA action games pretty much after I left college. Was the last time I was keeping up pretty actively with that stuff. So yeah, really, really pleasantly surprised. I'm glad that I have gone and played this. I'm interested in playing it on a higher difficulty. Yeah, really great, really good stuff.
I think my big takeaway from playing this game again is that if there is any game that deserves, like, and I mean that in the literal sense, like, this game deserves a remaster. I think it deserves to be brought up to modern day snuff. I think it not just like a remaster in which, like, oh, hey, it's now playable in 4K, whoop-de-fucking-do. I mean like an overhaul remaster. I think like the core of the game is fantastic. I think the mechanics, the ideas, the execution is all really good. But I think it could use a little bit more story in it, just to kind of to flesh things out a little bit. Not a lot. Don't go overboard with it. Like, the minimal storytelling is still the better way to go, but like just a little bit of smoother storytelling. And also a little bit of a new paint job. It's very brown and red and beige, which isn't necessarily a bad thing across the board, but like I think like the space station could be a little bit more vibrant in ways, and like the blood and body parts could be a little bit more red and body part color. Like it all kind of blends together, and I think like a little bit more differentiation between the masses of brown could add a little bit of uncomfortability. Words sometimes, man, just words. But like there's a level that could be added to this game that would make it a little bit better, even though it's already really great. So I do think that this game 100% deserves a remaster. I would play the fuck out of it.
All right, shall we take questions from our humble viewers here?
Let us see what people have been saying. So I'm gonna start right off the bat here. With glitches. The entire game is based around a message on your answering machine, and the twist is that you never watch the whole message. That is not wrong. There's a little bit more to it than that. Because part of it is that the marker, the thing that's creating the necromorphs, are like it distorts your mind. So like you might have watched the whole thing and it might be forcing you to forget it, or like it's vague. But like if you cut out the guff that makes it not stupid, yes, that is the stupid center to it. But there is guff around it that makes it better.
Also, I really like Desi's designations for my coinage of the genre of bro horror. Chad horror and horror bruh.
Horror bruh works real well.
Yeah. It does.
Desi, how does the emotion and horror of the man shooting off his limbs compare to the horror of hearing SpongeBob and Patrick cut theirs in the box episode? Oh my god, I forgot about that. Oh god. Wow. I can't believe they let that go through there.
I'm having like a vivid memory of watching that as a child now. Like this is like that just transported me through like time and place.
And like I as a kid, you just kind of laugh at it and move on. As an adult, you're like, oh my god, the Donner Party, things that this have actually happened to. Holy fucking shit, what is going on? What's going wrong? What's happening? Why did this air on Nickelodeon? Why did I watch this? Why did this not scar me? Oh god.
Moving on. So, Glitch. If I remember correctly, Dead Space's claim to fame was that sound engineering to the sound effects and music hold up today. The sound effects definitely. The music I thought was a little overbearing in parts, but not like in a particularly obnoxious way. But the sound is pivotal in making the combat feel as crunchy as it is.
Yeah, it makes the combat feel really like just thick and meaty. And it also like it keeps the atmosphere pretty well going as well, because like it's just machine sound effects and just various space atmosphere, honestly. Which, yeah, it puts you there. It works well.
All right, so Don Juan, do you think the horror of the necromorphs would have been better if we essentially spend the first X amount of hours not even really getting a good look at them? So that's like the conventional wisdom, right? Like, and they do that to a big extent. Like, I haven't played the full game, but Alien Isolation does that pretty well. And I'm torn because on the one hand, I kind of appreciate it feels like something in the game, like an internal sort of struggle that the game is having, in that like you want the necromorphs to be threatening as like body horror, Lovecraftian monstrosities, but you also want to get to the combat because the combat is fun and cool. So in some ways I kind of appreciate that we get to the point relatively quickly. But at the same time, it might have made the atmosphere a little better. I don't know. I think the system just works so well as like an action system that that might be the thing that for me personally would be hard to overcome. But I mean, I still felt moments of tension in, again, a very similar game, Resi 4. So maybe there's a way to make that work.
I mean, the game feels like it kind of struggles with that a little bit too, because there's more than one occasion where like you'll open a door as a necromorph comes at you that you just can't kill because it's trying to like leave the room or whatever. So like that would have worked, I guess, kind of. I don't know. It's hard to say. Yeah, like I can't imagine spending like the first level or two just kind of wandering around without the power to kill these things.
Yeah, because it's not like Alien Isolation, where that game is basically a big game of hide and seek. So, yeah, I don't know. That'd be a tricky needle to thread. And Desi is an interesting question, but while we're still on the topic, when Donwan says, because at least from I played this 10 years ago perspective, the reason this game was so horrific was me walking into a big open room and suddenly a ton of necros were shambling at me, but I could see it both ways. Yeah, like I think that's definitely the intention that they're going for. Maybe this is just me as a player, but that when it gets so chaotic, I stop feeling like horror feelings and start going into like Rambo action mode. But that might just be like the way my brain is wired and like personal preferences and all that.
I think part of that, honestly, because I'm with Don Juan on this, because 10 years ago, yeah, this game scared the piss out of me. I think part of it is just like the atmosphere that you played in. And I'm not saying like, the room, turn off all the lights atmosphere, but like the atmosphere of your mind. Because 10 years removed, like the conversation on this game being a horror game has kind of dissipated. It's still, talked about as a really good game and everything, but like not everyone's talking on like, oh my God, Dead Space, dude, it's so fucking scary. It's more just like Dead Space. It's a good game. You should play it. So like, I don't know that like the when you don't have like the constant reminder that this is supposed to be a scary game in your face, it's way easier for it to just become the action game that it seems like it is, Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, because I remember, I remember pretty vividly the conversations about this game that people were having, even though I didn't play it, and a lot of it was definitely like talking about how scary it was and like, oh shit, like I'm freaking out. So yeah, there's something to be said for that.
Plus, as a teenager, like I know I'm trying to like as a teenager, the horror I would have watched would have been like Evil Dead, and like the only other thing I would have really been aware of at the time would have been like Saw and other bad jump scare movies. So like I can't help but wonder if like our idea of horror was just skewed to be not that scary, like in hindsight, like very, very teen horror.
So I really want to come back to Desi's question about games from sort of the previous console generation, but I kind of want to save that for last, because I think that's a meaty one that I got a lot of feelings about. So I'll go to his other question. So overall, where does the horror action lie on a scale of atmospheric sheer terror to Chris Redfield punching a boulder in a volcano? Definitely much closer to the boulder punching, in my opinion.
Although it's never silly.
No, that was actually one thing I was sort of thinking about. I thought about because Resident Evil, particularly like 4, and I mean I don't know about 5 how intentional it is, but 4 was intentionally very campy, which is one thing that I liked about it. Whereas this game is played pretty straight, so it's not like campy dumb like that. Like it's not a total farce, but it's definitely more like like even I'd call it even more like blood pumping than something like Aliens. Like even in Aliens, that's a movie about, kind of blowing away the horde as well, but there's still those moments of like, oh, I can't see them in the walls, like they're coming through the vents, and like, all the motion tracker is going off and you can't see it. So like just above Aliens, I would say.
I think the atmospheric part is sticking with me, because I think the atmosphere of this game does feel terror from like the aesthetic standpoint of things, but I think the gameplay overrides that so much that it does end up feeling more actiony. Like there's definitely a lot of horror underlying it, but a lot of that gets kind of pushed to the side for a more shoot 'em up type of game.
Yeah, because the environments are very Silent Hill looking, actually.
Yeah, and like they're intense. They feel intense. So, yeah, I think that's really what it boils down to. Is I think that there's a lot of horror to it, but it's so overridden by the action side of it.
Yeah. And even like moments in like Zero G where you're like bouncing off the walls. Like, yeah, you have a necromorph in Zero Gravity that you didn't see lunging at you, but because you're, again, I'm thinking about Super Mario Galaxy, not about like sheer terror in these moments, which is not a bad thing. I appreciated that as like a way to spice up the gameplay, but yeah.
The game fucking ruled. I'm sorry. The more I'm thinking about it, I really liked this. I had a great time with this game.
No, this game's great. This game's wonderful. All right, so big broad question from Desi. Playing games from previous gens, I found that PS Wii 60 era has not really held up particularly well looking back. The graphics and physics glitches are very apparent compared to the gens before and after it. Thoughts? So,
well, first, what'd you play it on?
I played it on PS3.
Okay. I played it on PC, and I'm gonna go first just because I feel like I'm gonna be able to answer this a little bit quicker.
Sure.
I ran into no glitches. I thought visually it had very much the brown visuals of the era, but I think that kind of worked in its favor in a lot of ways, which is why I think I demand a remaster of this game at this point. But like I don't think I didn't really run into any glitches outside of that, and the hand thing. But even that just felt like physics of the era. It didn't really feel like a bad fall through the floor Sonic 06 glitch. I will say though, in order for me to play this game, I had to install a patch to fix mouse controls. So, I mean, yeah, it's a little broken, but like installing the patch was super fucking easy. So, take from that what you will.
So, regarding Dead Space specifically, I think it's held up pretty well, even on consoles. I think that the overabundance of physics objects is something that's very much of the era and can be pretty distracting, especially in the more like tense
when
or dramatic
someone just
moments.
dies and bounces on the floor.
Yeah, when you're kicking around a sympathetic NPC like a football, it's not really great. And I noticed like 2008 in particular, like I'm remembering for some daft fucking reason in Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, they made all of the collectibles Havoc physics objects, which like you can't. It's hard to describe the full implications of how terrible this is until you're actually playing it.
Let me ask. Sonic 06 Ring Bomb.
Yes.
Okay, then I know exactly where we're at there. I get it.
And so like that was just something like every game licensed Havoc, every game felt like they needed some crazy physics thing, which I feel like has either died off or gotten integrated a lot more smoothly into gameplay. Like I'm thinking like Breath of the Wild or MGS5 like actually having meaningful uses for its physics stuff and it not being as in your face about it. But regarding in general from the era, I'm inclined to agree, having gone back to a few games, and I think that a lot of it is just because it was such a transitionary period, in that like PS2 era games were really like iterating. You had like better graphics, but in terms of like the scope of what you could do, it was still very much within the realms of like what you would see in the previous generation on like the 64 and the PS1. Whereas like if you think about something, I think Assassin's Creed 1 is actually the perfect example. So Assassin's Creed 1, it's become like kind of the it set the standard and set the template for like what your basic open world game looks like nowadays. And
which is to say repetitive and boring. Oh wow, where did that hot take come from?
Well, exactly. So like so the thing is that like in terms of tech, like as far as being a leap forward from like the PS2 era, like Assassin's Creed 1 was very impressive. Like, these beautifully rendered like cities, like full of crowds you could like weave in and out of. But then when you like squint and look closely at what's going on, like the amount of interactions you can do with the environment is not that great. It's terrible, actually, by like a modern standard, of course. So like, I think that it's kind of like the PlayStation 1 and the Nintendo 64. Like, I think that there's some, as us aging boomers get old, there's more of a willingness to kind of reevaluate a lot of those games, I think. But the general consensus for a long time was that because it was a similar leap from like 2D to 3D, you know, going from standard definition to HD, like big open world stuff, like that era was also kind of a growing pains era. And for every game that I could list from that era that I still really love, there are like 10 others that, you know, may have been impressive in their own right for the time, but just are, you know, borderline unplayable nowadays. And I think it's similar, but to a lesser degree with the previous generation. There were a lot of strides made in technology, a lot of strides made in sort of narrative function. So even though like there are a lot of individual games, I think, that hold up and are, you know, worth playing and, you know, are well regarded, it's not like the PS2 era or the Now era, I guess, where the technology was more stable. It was less about pushing tech to like its absolute limits and doing new stuff with it, and more about like taking a lot of existing sort of templates and, you know, sort of shining them and like thinking of new creative things to do with it. Like, okay, we've done 3D, now let's see what we can do with all the stuff we've learned from the N64 and the PS2 games. Like, okay, we've done open worlds for like a whole generation, but only now with games like, you know, and even then we're still not seeing the full potential. Games like Breath of the Wild in particular, but MGS5 I'd also put in this category, like where the mechanics and the interactions of the world are a lot more organic than something like Assassin's Creed 1, which nonetheless would have been a big fucking deal back in the day. So yeah, that's my little mini TED talk about that.
What we're saying is that not everything can be as stable as the PS2 era classic My Street.
Not everything can be as iconic as My Street. Let's go to the chemistry lab.
And let's also go to the end credits, because I don't think that we have anything else to say here.
I think that's a good place to wrap it up.
So, I've been Sean McKinda. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. You can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/helpless_skippy. Some of you may already be here. I stream all the time. You can also find my writing. That's what I was going to say. You can also find my writing over at 25yearslatersite.com. I've got some stuff coming up with them soon enough here. It's been a little bit of a lull for me, but don't worry, I'm coming back. So go read that shit. It's good stuff.
And I've been Jackson Keller. You can find me at twitch.tv/JacksonJKeller. I've been playing. I want to give another shout out to my good friend, my good buddy, Duncan Keller, who made a video game called Mournful Sword that you can play right now. I've been streaming that. I also play Smash Bros. All the time. We might even do like Dead Space hard mode on Halloween or something. So yeah, go look at that.
Sick. If you want to keep in contact with the podcast, you can go follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast. I'm trying to tweet more from there. I've been doing pretty well this week so far, so go follow us over there. If you want to contact Jax and I more directly, the best way to do that is to join our Discord, and the best way to do that is to go over to patreon.com/BADHcast, or BADH, no, it is just BADHcast. Well, I'm gonna get my shit together one of these days. It's gonna happen.
Say, one of these days we really have to sit down and standardize that shit.
And you can do so for just $1 a month. That's like a fucking one burrito at Taco Bell, and you can be a part of our Discord. It's great. At $5 a month, you get access to all our bonus episodes. We've had some serious bangers in there. They're really good episodes, so go do that. And at $10 a month, you get to pick our bonus episodes. You also get a little something something.
Special thanks to Julia, Travis, Autumn Keller, Summer Skaggs. Thank you so much for helping us keep the lights on here and being our glorious stallions.
Y'all are wonderful. Also, thanks loads to the Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide Alternate Take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. You should go check them out wherever you can. See them live, listen to them streaming, buy their music, whatever you got to do. Go do it. And thanks for the endorsement from 25yearslatersite.com. We're on their website. You can go click on our little logo, and it'll take us right to badhcast.com. But you should also stay there and actually read some of their articles because they've got a bunch of really good stuff. They're going hard on the Watchmen coverage, the new series that just started on HBO. So if you're watching that, you should really probably check them out for your news. It's the best place to do it. But they also have like gaming news and wrestling news and TV and movie news and interviews and reviews and honestly everything. If you can think of it, they probably have it. As I said, next week is either going to be Jojo Rabbit or The Lighthouse. We'll see what we have options. Bye.
See ya!